Queen Lucia by E. F. Benson. Read for LibriVox.org by Martin Clifton. Chapter 8. Throughout August, Guruism reigned supreme over the cultured life of Riseholme, and the priestess and dispenser of its mysteries was Lucia. Never before had she ruled from so elate a pinnacle, nor wielded so secure a supremacy. None had access to the Guru but through her. All his classes were held in the smoking parlour, and he meditated only in Hamlet or in the sequestered arbour at the end of the laburnum walk. Once he had meditated on the village green, but Lucia did not approve of that, and had led him, still wrapped, home by the hand. The classes had swelled prodigiously, for practically all Riseholmites now were at some stage of instruction, with the exception of Hermy and Ursie, who pronounced the whole thing piffle, and, as gentle chaff for Georgie, sometimes stood on one leg in the middle of the lawn and held their breath. Then Hermy would say 1, 2, 3, and they shouted "Om" at the tops of their discordant voices. Now that the Guru was practically interned in the hearse, they had actually never set eyes on him, for they had not chosen to come to the Hightum garden party, preferring to have a second round of golf, and meeting Lucia next day had been distinctly irreverent on the subject of Eastern philosophy. Since then she had not been aware of their existence. Lucia now received special instruction from the Guru in a class all by herself, so prodigious was her advance in yoga, for she could hold her breath much longer than anybody else, and had mastered 6 postures, while the next class which she attended also consisted of the other original members, namely Daisy Quantock, Georgie and Peppino. They had got on very well too, but Lucia had quite shot away from them, and now if the Guru had other urgent spiritual claims on him, she gave instruction to a less advanced class herself. For this purpose she habited herself in a peculiarly becoming dress of white linen, which reached to her feet and had full flowing sleeves like a surplice. It was girdled with a silver cord with long tassels, and had mother-of-pearl buttons and a hood at the back lined with white satin, which came over her head. Below its hem, as she sat and taught in a really rather advanced posture, showed the toes of her white morocco slippers, and she called it her teacher's robe. The class which she taught consisted of Colonel Boucher, Piggy Antrobus and Mrs. Weston. Sometimes the Colonel brought his bulldogs with him, who lay and snorted precisely as if they were doing breathing exercises too. A general air of joyful mystery and spiritual endeavour blew balmily round them all, and without any doubt the exercises and the deep breathing were extremely good for them. One evening, towards the end of the month, Georgie was sitting in his garden, for the half hour before dressing time, thinking how busy he was, and yet how extraordinarily young and fresh he felt. Usually this month, when Hermy and Ursie were with him, was very fatiguing, and in ordinary years he would have driven away with Foljambe and Dicky on the day after their departure, and had a quiet week by the seaside. But now, though his sisters were going away tomorrow morning, he had no intention of taking a well-earned rest, in spite of the fact that not only had he been their host all this time, but had done an amazing quantity of other things as well. There had been the daily classes to begin with, which entailed much work in the way of meditation and exercises, as well as the actual learning, and also he had had another job, which might easily have taxed his energies to the utmost any other year, for Olga Bracely had definitely bought that house, without which she had felt that life was not worth living, and Georgie all this month had, at her request, been exercising a semi-independent supervision over its decoration and furnishing. She had ordered the general scheme herself, and had sent down from London the greater part of the furniture, but Georgie was commissioned to report on any likely pieces of old stuff that he could find, and, if expedition was necessary, to act on his own responsibility and buy them. But above all, secrecy was still necessary till the house was so complete that her Georgie might be told. And by the end of the month Riseholme generally was in a state of prostration, following on the violent and feverish curiosity as to who had taken the house. Georgie had gone so far as to confess that he knew, but the most pathetic appeals as to the owner's identity had fallen on obdurate, if not deaf, ears. Not the smallest hint would he give on the subject, and though those incessant visits to the house, those searchings for furniture, the bestowal of it in suitable places, the superintendence of the making of the garden, the interviewing of paper-hangers, plumbers, upholsterers, painters, carpenters, and so forth, occupied a great deal of time, the delicious mystery about it all, and the fact that he was doing it for so adorable a creature, rendered his exertions a positive refreshment. Another thing which, in conjunction with this and his youth-giving studies, made him feel younger than ever, was the discreet arrival and perfect success of his toupee. No longer was there any need to fear the dislocation of his espaliered locks. He felt so secure and undetectable in that regard that he had taken to wearing no hat, and was soon about to say that his hair was growing more thickly than ever in consequence. But it was not quite time for that yet. It would be inartistic to suggest that just a couple of weeks of hatlessness had produced so desirable a result. As he sat at ease after the labours of the day, he wondered how the coming of Olga Bracely to Riseholme would affect the economy of the place. It was impossible to think of her, with her beauty, her charm, her fame, her personality, as taking any second place in its life. Unless she was really meaning to use Riseholme as a retreat, to take no part in its life at all, it was hard to see what part she would take, except the first part. One who by her arrival at Lucia's ever memorable party had converted it in a moment from the most dire of scrubs, in a psychical sense, to the heightenedest gathering ever known, could not lay aside her distinction and preeminence. Never had Lucia scored so amazingly as over Olga's late appearance, which had the effect of bringing back all her departed guests with the compulsion of a magnet over iron filings, and sending up the whole party like a rocket into the zenith of social success. All Riseholme knew that Olga had come, after playing croquet with Georgie the entire afternoon, and had given them free, gratis, and for nothing, such a treat as only the wealthiest could obtain with the most staggering fees. Lady Ambermere alone, driving back to the Hall with Pug and poor Miss Lyall, was the only person who had not shared in that, and she knew all about it next day, for Georgie had driven out on purpose to tell her, and met Lucia coming away. How, then, would the advent of Olga affect Riseholme's social working generally, and how would it affect Lucia in particular, and what would Lucia say when she knew on whose behalf Georgie was so busy with plumbers and painters, and with buying so many of the desirable treasures in the Ambermere Arms? Frankly, he could not answer these conundrums. They presupposed inconceivable situations, which yet, though inconceivable, were shortly coming to pass. For Olga's advent might be expected before October, that season of tea parties that ushered in the multifarious gaieties of the winter. Would Olga form part of the moonlight circle to whom Lucia played the first movement of the Moonlight Sonata, and give a long sigh at the end like the rest of them? And would Lucia, when they had all recovered a little from the invariable emotion, go to her and say, "Olga mia, just a little bit out of the Valkyrie? It would be so pleasant." Somehow Georgie, with all his imagination, could not picture such a scene. And would Olga take the part of second citizeness, or something of the sort, when Lucia played Portia? Would Olga join the elementary class of yoga, and be instructed by Lucia in her teacher's robe? Would she sing treble in the Christmas carols, while Lucia beat time and said in syllables dictated by the rhythm, "Treble's a little flat, my poor ears"? Georgie could not imagine any of these things, and yet, unless Olga took no part in the social life of Riseholme at all, and that was equally inconceivable, what was the alternative? True, she had said that she was coming here because it was so ideally lazy a backwater, but Georgie did not take that seriously. She would soon see what Riseholme was, when its life poured down in spate, whirling her punt along with it. And finally, what would happen to him when Olga was set as a shining star in this firmament? Already he revolved about her. He was aware, like some eager